This is AE Fundamentals, a 12-part series where I break down the 12 most important elements to becoming a top AE. This is part 2 on multi-threading. Multi-threading is really important. Statistically, when 4 or more people are involved in your deal, your close rates skyrocket. By contrast, if you're single-threaded with one individual at a company, it puts huge reliance on that stakeholder. If they get sick or ill or busy or tired or pulled into another project or any other reason, then you have no deal. And once you're multi-threaded, especially across different teams, you're going to have a much stronger business case because there's areas of value, not just in one department, but across multiple, which is great for having a strong business case that is going to get signed off, but also having a bigger deal, which is always good in sales. My take is that multi-threading begins before the very first call. Going into the call with a good idea of the team structure, who you're speaking with, but ideally who you'd like to be speaking with at the next stage can really be helpful towards multi-threading. I also find it's really key that I proactively drive multi-threading throughout the deal. It's not something you should put the onus on your champion or allow to happen naturally. It needs to be a proactive, forward-thinking strategy and something that you're driving at each stage where relevant. One of the best ways you can do that is by building trust and being a trusted advisor so that the people you're speaking with feel comfortable and confident when introducing you to their colleagues. When I'm on a first discovery call, something I'll always mention as part of the upfront contract is, as part of a next step, the potential of looping in the wider team or introducing this to the relevant people. I find planting the seed nice and early and kind of sowing back to it a couple of times throughout the session means that there's not all this kind of surprise or too much onus at the end of a call when all of a sudden you start to ask for an introduction maybe to the wider team. So planting that seed really early I find very helpful. Once I've done 5 minutes of rapport building and I've got into the first few questions of the discovery and started to feel that maybe I'm connecting with the prospect and there's some strong rapport that's being built, at that point I might look to name drop one of the key stakeholders as part of one of my questions. For example, if they've alluded to a particular pain, I might follow up with that to say, hey, I noticed that Michelle actually leads this team, and typically when I'm speaking with companies like your guys, someone in her role would also be interested in these types of challenges as well. Is this something she's aware of, or does she have focuses elsewhere? I find getting on a first name basis with the key individuals early on, again, once you've built a little bit of trust, as opposed to referring to them as your VP, your director, your boss, I feel like when you use those types of words, it creates this kind of power differential and puts them on the pedestal, perhaps, which makes it a little bit harder and feels that it's more of an ask to then get in front of them after that call. I'm also a big fan of using the phrase based in my experience to frame my questions because it makes it seem like it's the kind of thing you're doing all the time, speaking with the directors or the VPs, whoever it might be. And that's something that really helps position you as a trusted advisor. So plan A is to try and get a next step with additional stakeholders on the team and ideally maybe someone more senior. It's not always going to be possible. So here's a couple of other techniques that I try to help continue the multi-threading when that doesn't happen. As one of the tasks in the next steps, I'll ask the prospect that I've spoken to speak with the name of their manager in their one-to-one, and I've ideally found out when that's likely going to be. So I kind of set them a specific task to speak with a specific individual to kind of really prompt and provide some guidance post-call. I'll also try and add as many of the wider team just to try and get a handful of connections on LinkedIn, which I may or may not actually leverage immediately, but it's always good to just have some open connections there. So if you need to start a conversation with someone across the team, should a deal get stuck later down the line, then you can do so. And then in terms of a follow-up email, I'll send one kind of overarching email with the bulk of the information that everybody needs in one thread, but then also just sending individual emails off to specific people, referring back to things that maybe they've asked during the session. A simple example of this could be referring back to the call to say, hey, I remember you asked a question specifically around this topic. It made me think, and here's some really relevant content I think might be useful for you. There's no need to ask for anything off the back of that. Just demonstrate the goodwill, show that you've listened, and point them in the right direction with something useful. One final concept that I also find very useful is trying to avoid questions that end in the answer yes or no. So an example of that could be, instead of asking, can we get your boss on a call next week? I would say something along the lines of, hey, typically what I would do at this stage would be to run a secondary session where we can dive into everything in a bit more detail, uncover some of the potential ROI, and showcase how a couple of other similar customers to you guys have solved the same challenges. Normally someone like Michelle would be on that session so she can start to see the value around the types of things that we're discussing as well. Would a session like that be useful for you as a collective, or do you think she might prefer a more personalized, tailored video to boil down the concepts instead? So the idea there is to position something as option A and option B, both of which involve us kind of connecting with the team and creating something that's shareable and is going to get engagement, as opposed to just asking, can we do this, yes or no, and just allowing the option for us to get shut down. So to summarize, I try to make sure that I'm multi-threading before the first call starts by having a clear understanding of the team structure and maybe some key stakeholders who I'd like to get involved. I myself feel personally responsible for driving multi-threading throughout a deal cycle, and it's not something that you should allow to happen passively. And being a trusted advisor in everything you say and do is a really key concept to building trust and ensuring that your prospects and your champions want to and feel confident sharing you internally and connecting you with their colleagues. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn for part 3, which is going to be on discovery.